We also continue our interviews with candidates in next Tuesday's election. Tonight's guest is running for Governor's Council in District 4. We'd like to welcome the Working Families candidate, Joe Ureneck. Thank you very much for being with us, Joe.
Thanks for having me on, Chris. It's a pleasure.
Talk about the council. For people who don't hear very much about it, what do they do?
Well, the Governor's Council is an 8-member body. There are 8 districts throughout the state. And they're all elected. There's no requirement to be a lawyer to be on the council. It's the intent of the council was to have ordinary people on the council. And their most important function is to vote up or down on all of the judicial nominations that are presented by the governor for the judgeships. That's all the judges that sit in the local district courts, through the superior courts and appeals courts, all the way up to the Supreme Judicial Court. So it's a very important body that very few people know even exists. And even fewer people know exactly what it does, but it's an extremely important body and one that people should take a really hard look at each election cycle.
Unlike some people on the council, you're not a lawyer, but you've also spent a lot of time following the council. Why is that?
Right. Well, I started following the council going back about 4 or 5 years ago. I've probably been to more of the council meetings. They have official meetings every Wednesday at noon, which the public is invited to. And they also have hearings for all the judicial nominations. And the public is invited to those hearings as well. So I started to get involved in that because I was very concerned about how men and fathers, and by extension families and children, are treated in the court system. There's a big problem with the breakup of the family, as everyone is well aware of, and it's made much worse when you have the court system actively engaged in activities that exacerbate that problem.
Well, in the minds of judges faced with these conflicts, they have to worry about fairness, and sometimes they're also worried about maybe a threat of domestic violence, too.
Well, the domestic violence is a whole big issue, which I believe is, the name itself is rather unclear in terms of what actually happens, because when they talk about domestic violence, it includes a lot of things that in a normal world, in my opinion, they would never consider it domestic violence. For example, when we have an argument, we were living together, we had an argument, a verbal argument. Under today's laws, that's considered domestic violence. We've been in court and watching men primarily, when a judge makes a decision where a spouse, primarily a woman, will come up and say, well, this person, my husband, doesn't listen to me, and I want a restraining order to make him listen to me. Those kind of things in no normal world would be considered domestic violence, but that is the majority of the cases that come before the court. In Massachusetts, every year there's 30 to 40,000, quote, so-called domestic violence cases or abuse prevention cases. The vast majority of them involve no violence whatsoever.
If you look back at some of the recent appointments to judgeships in the state here, anything that you would have done differently?
Well, I would have voted against most of the judgeships over the last 4 or 5 years, to be quite honest. I think there's the biggest problem with the council as a body right now is that it's almost like an insider trading organization. But there's a bit of history that needs to be laid out here. In the 1970s, the council was taken to task because some of the councilors were charged with selling judgeships. So there was a move to reduce its powers and to rearrange the process by which judges are selected. Mike Dukakis, the governor at the time, set up what's called the Judicial Nominating Committee, JNC. And he set it up. He had some very good ideas. I agreed with what he was doing completely. He wanted the council he wanted the process to be not controlled by the legal industry. So he set up the JNC, and he mandated that less than 50% of the JNC who would select and vet the judicial nominees would be lawyers. And that's how he set it up. He also wanted community hearings for all the judicial nominees. Now, in succeeding governorships, that has changed completely. The JNC is now much larger. It's all lawyers, and there's no community meetings to vet the people who become judges.
Can you do something about that as a governor's council? I mean, your powers are pretty limited, aren't they?
They are, exactly. That's exactly right. As a governor's council, you can vote up or down on the judgeships. If you say to the governor, as a councilor, we want this process to be more open and transparent. For example, you want the Judicial Nominating Committee application to be public. You at least have some wherewithal to say to the governor that you want this done, or you're not going to look favorably upon the nominations that come before him. You asked about the judges that have been nominated and approved recently. I said that I would have voted against most of the judges that have come up. 2 in particular I think were very important, and they were approved 8-0 by the council. Now remember, 4 of the council are lawyers, and the other 4 are not lawyers. But the idea that a lawyer who's going to be voting on somebody to become a judge does not have a conflict of interest, I think, is something that should be looked at. No matter how good the person is as a counselor and a lawyer, there's always an inherent conflict of interest that the person will be thinking, I might be behind this, in front of this judge someday in the future, and my voting for this person he'll look favorably upon it because I put him on the bench. So I think the Governor's Council should be non-lawyers completely. I think it should be a civilian, quote, civilian body, and it should be a diverse group of people who vet the people who are going to be sitting on the bench. The judges are so important in everyone's life, from a parking ticket all the way up to the Supreme Judicial Court, which deals with major social issues in our society. And to not have a diverse group of people looking at these judges before they get there, I think, is a big mistake.
Another issue that's been talked about by candidates for council here is what to do about mandatory sentencing, especially for talking about people who have not committed violent crimes.
Right.
Anything you'd like to see differently, especially some of the drug charges, for example?
Well, I did fill out a questionnaire by the Families Against Mandatory Minimums, and I told them I was against mandatory minimums. I did that for a couple of reasons. One is, I don't think the legislature does a very good job of making laws in our state. I think there's a lot of horrible laws. If you look at some of the laws they passed, we can go into that in a moment perhaps, then you say, well, what kind of laws are they putting people in jail for? There's a big problem there. On the other hand, judges should be responsible for sentencing. They should be the ones who look at all the cases that come before them and not have their hands tied. That does not mean that I'm in favor of letting everyone who has a drug-related charge get off easy. But it does mean that the judge should have the powers to look at the person and make his or her own decision. This, in terms of the Governor's Council and the powers that they make and the laws that judges have to deal with, the thing that's lacking in the Governor's Council now when they vet judges is the sense that justice should be foremost in their mind when they vet a candidate for a judgeship. The councilors, for as long as I've been going there, have always talked about the quality of justice and not providing justice to the people who come before them. And it's an important distinction because justice means that if a law is bad, intrinsically bad, an unjust law, then a judge should do everything in his or her power to make sure that it's not thrust upon someone who comes before them.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Okay, thank you.
Joe Ureneck, candidate for Governor's Council in District 4. We'll have sports up ahead with Pat Flaherty.